So it's November now, and Jordan Peterson is still relevant, and he's not going away, which is a good thing, I'd say, because it gives me something to talk about, and I feel myself getting sucked back into the Petersonian world. The downside, of course, is that because he's not going away, and because people aren't acquiescing to the part of his message that's reasonable, he himself is becoming more unreasonable, which is a fear that I had even back in August and July when I was first exploring the Petersonian world. You have there's all these new contentions from Peterson that seem more crazier, and can't tell if he's always believed these things or if these things are just things he's arriving at now due to all the pushback that he's had from the left that's sent him careening over to the other side, where he's been inundated with all this crap from the Cato Institute and some other fucking nonsense news sources and nonsense ideologues, and yeah, and now he doesn't believe in global warming and so on. So there's downsides. The way that the Petersonian world works, more or less, is that Peterson is great when it comes to all of the intangibles, but he's totally wrong when it comes to all the tangibles. Well, maybe not all the tangibles, but a good deal of them. Like, I haven't studied all of the videos in Jesus Christ and all the debates with Sam Harris, good Lord, but when it comes to practical issues, like when it comes to economic policy and healthcare and even economic theory, where exactly does Peterson stand? I can just guess without trying very hard, and I'd probably be right, and I know that his opinion is almost certainly going to be influenced by the particular group that he's surrounded himself by. So that part there is a little unfortunate. Not too much sympathy there, and good Lord, I think if anyone wants to, debate him on those practical issues, they'd probably be right. But he's still on point when it comes to all the intangibles, and I do want to blame the left a little here because they have such trouble acquiescing to even the most reasonable parts of Peterson that the unreasonable stuff, it forces him to get even more unreasonable when they won't accept reasonability. It's this kind of thing. It's like if someone isn't going to be reasonable, you're not going to be reasonable. And if the more unreasonable they are, the more unreasonable you are. And that leads to the nonsense that we have to deal with. I'm talking, of course, so what am I talking about? I mean, I'm talking about the parts of Peterson that I like, that I still like, which is why I adore him, even though that I think on practical issues he's like completely wrong. The stuff with regards to union forms and his way of bringing sort of like this Kierkegaardian idea of religion back into the fold and sort of trying to universalize it and objectify it and talk about self-improvement and all that shit and the virtues entailed in that. It's very clear that the man understands the value of all those things, right? He's in this interview with this British feminist lady, and they're talking about the guy who invented tampons and so on, and then she says, well, this is nice, and Peterson says, well, no, it's not nice, it's courageous, it's brave. I like that, because he understands the value of those things, right? We don't need niceness. We've had enough niceness. People can't be obsessed with niceness anymore, right? The whole idea that Peterson brings forward in this is like, well, you don't need niceness. You need bravery, you need courage, you need honor, you need valor, you need strength of character, and so on. And those things are not encapsulated but your ability to be nice. It's why I'm so fucking like just tired of like, you just hear these like casual conversations and someone's like, oh yeah, I like that guy, he's so nice. Or it's like, oh yeah, I met them, they're totally nice guys, very chill mood, it's really nice and chill. Shut the fuck up. Who gives a fuck if it's nice or chill? These are fleeting, weak fucking feelings that you will get bored of very quick. Why exactly does this matter? Why is this the front line of what everyone seems to recognize about, someone's behavior? That's not the shit that matters, right? The stuff that actually matters, the other stuff I just mentioned, that stuff's not in the conversation, not nowhere near enough, right? And you even bring that stuff up, it gets casually sneered at by the common rabble, and anyone who tries to even attempt to live by those virtues, actually live by those virtues, not just pretend to live by them, gets sneered at even more as some sort, or cringed at as some sort of poser pretending to be what he isn't, or trying to have some sort of shallow appeal because he doesn't have any other merit. It's like guys are only trying to be nice to get girls to like them and stuff, not because, or you get the thing. It's like everything, every element of virtue is sort of superficialized in that way. And you don't exactly know what the people who's superficializing it even expect. And the only way you can even superficialize it that way is either if you're living in a bubble, or if you'd have to be living in a bubble, or if you're taking that kind of thing for granted. Like honor and goodness and strength of character, these things they just happen. People just have these things. You don't need to emphasize these things. You don't need to be serious. Stop being serious about it, right? But no, those things you need to be serious about those things, because those things are very much not a given. You're very much casually surrounded by people who don't have those things. So you absolutely have to emphasize them. But you don't have to emphasize them, you have to bear the risk, because that emphasizing those things has stakes. Because if someone doesn't have those qualities, you have to think less of them. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to actively think less of other people, not to their face. So that's just a mini little rant, but this is just part of the reason why I like Peterson. Is because he actually understands that shit, right? And he's very sympathetic to men, young men especially, who seemingly care about that stuff, but it goes unrewarded. And I do think that it does go unrewarded. And this ties into the incel problem a little bit, and the MGTOW problem, and all that stuff. But the part where I disagree is that you can also, in some sense, the leftists, the ardent leftists, the feminists, some of the SJWs, they have those qualities as well. Right, they also have the same kind of conviction, the same devotion, the same, the same emphasis on value. It's just pointed towards slightly different things and slightly different kinds of issues, but they still care about those things, right? So you have to give credit where credit is due, and this is where we will actually diverge, right? From Beyondist, complexitist, BLR perspective, from that frame of mind, which is the frame of mind that I'm always in at this point. I don't care if Peterson is right or left. The economic issues particularly, which I'm sure he is wrong about, don't matter that much. Not with him, not with the purpose of his particular work. The value of Peterson, the value of Jordan Peterson specifically, isn't in any of the practical issues. It's in the intangible stuff. It's in the strength of character idea. This idea of greatness and the pursuit of greatness and self-improvement and all those things. Just on a like a tactics level as well. That is the value of Peterson. That is the good stuff about Peterson. That is the stuff that you cannot possibly ever ignore from Peterson. And I find it so baffling why leftist after leftist, casual leftists, not ardent leftists, like casual people just seem to have like, they seemingly, some weird odd perception of it where like they don't even want to emphasize the value of that. Like you don't have to emphasize the value of that. It's like, sure, that stuff's true, but this other stuff is the stuff that's important. Why? Why isn't that stuff important either as well? It should be important, right? Unless you don't think that it's missing, in which case you're living in a bubble, because it certainly is missing from where I'm standing in the society at large. But, of course, there's problems with Peterson nonetheless. Let's talk about those problems. I mean, the global warming thing, for one, that's the most recent issue that's come up, which is just kind of like hilarious. The problem is if it's all coming from like, there are like dialectical contradictions in some of the practical like positions Peterson takes. For example, he talks about how life is a tragedy, but then he also talks about how we're living the best of all possible worlds. Well, How do you rectify those two things? Right? Moreover, if life itself is a tragedy, if that's just the inherent fucking, nature of experiential reality, why do anything? I mean, what exactly is a tragedy? A tragedy isn't something that I want to participate in. A tragedy is something I want to avoid. That's actually the whole point of tragedy, is it's to inform you of the thing that you don't want to have happen. But if life is a tragedy, then you want to avoid life, in which case we should all just become antinatalists and stop procreating and give up and just let the tragedy die. But that's not what Peterson wants, certainly not, and it doesn't make any sense. Right? The whole issue is that life can't be a tragedy. Life has the potential for tragedy, and you need to be aware of that potential. But that's not how he says it. And you could say, well, that's just framing, but it's not just framing, because he keeps repeating that thing. He keeps repeating that point. So I wonder how he'd say that if I brought this up, because it's not just, it doesn't feel like just a way of saying something, right? The potential for tragedy is very different for the inherentness of tragedy. The inherentness of tragedy, like in its own nature, is not something that you should want to participate in. And that's the other issue with Peterson, is that he has this like sourness to him. Like everything's just negative. Life is this tragedy, and it's this like it's this like endless grimy battle against horror, and and in your own life, it's like, well, what is the potential? Where is the victory condition in it? Where's the winning condition, right? Do you not have a win condition? Let me be completely fair. I can accept the idea that life, or where life currently is, or where society currently is in that state, that negative, pessimistic, sour, bitter state. But there's a win condition, right? There's a condition at some point it's not in that state anymore. There is some mechanistic sense of where that state ends and a better state begins. And true, the win, when you've won and when things are actually good, or at least better. But I don't see that. Again, that's not in his theorizing whatsoever. What is better? What is a better world? I don't see Peterson talking about that. Right? And when he has talked about that, it's been very kind of like, it's almost like a deflection, like, no, well, a better world is when people seize responsibility and they find meaning in their lives and so on. Okay, but what does that look like externally, right? Because you're just talking about, you're talking about like internal desire to make things better. What does that actually look like externally? What kind of shifts would that create? And this brings me to the next problem of Peterson, is that he doesn't actually describe where society is going whatsoever. Now, in a sense, this is the general problem with conservatism as a whole. Conservatism as a whole is like, it's like the purpose of conservatism, again, if we're in the Beyondist frame, the purpose of conservatism is to shoot down ideas from the left when those ideas are stupid. So if leftist comes in and says, well, we should, have gender equality in this thing, we should try to encourage people to get into STEM, whatever the fuck. We should introduce all these policies, etc. And a conservative will say, no, that's wrong, because that'll lead to disaster. That'll lead to disaster A. That other thing will lead to disaster B, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's how it works. But at what point do you actually have any sense of what better is? Because I'll tell you what the problem is. If you're a conservative and you have no sense as to what a better world is, besides what the world already has, then there's no way for the dialectic to move forward, right? In any practical way, you're just constantly going to be arguing in a non-progressive way. Progress will still happen accidentally, but you won't be consciously contributing to it, not within the dialectic, because you're not giving any leeway for what the path forward is, right? It's like that's not the path, that's not the path, that's not the path. What is the path? Is there even a path? There has to be a path somewhere. Otherwise, there's no purpose to the dialectic at all, in which case, what the fuck is the point of arguing to begin with? But moreover, there has to be a path because there has to be some sense of things have to constantly be changing in order for the system to increase in complexity, right? In order for the system to grow, the practical reality of it must constantly shift, and not just shift in a close your eyes and forget about how it's shifting and focus on your own labor shifting, but in a visionary, I see how the world should shift and it actually does shift that way sort of way. That's what should actually be happening. If you're a conservative, you have to be aware of that and care about that, but they don't. So even though I'd say Peterson is like the best conservative that there is, and certainly my favorite conservative, and there's not that many of those, unfortunately, this is still a drawback to him and his ideas and the general, character of that whole ideology, right? Where exactly do you see progress? Where specifically do you see progress? No. Don't just tell me that it's not in what the left says. Where do you see it, right? Because you have to play that game a little bit, at least a tiny bit, in order to have an opinion, a perspective that's respectable. You have to at least engage in that same process that the left does, which is trying to imagine ways in which the world can be better. So there's that. Next, you have, you might give a little sense of it, like how I'm bouncing between like the problems on the left here and the problems on the right, because there's problems on both ends. Again, I'm in the Beyondists, complexitist BLR frame of mind, where it's not about which political side you're on, right? I'm not a leftist, right? I'm not a rightist, despite, how many people have thought otherwise, and I'm not a fucking centrist either. Good Lord, that part's going to get annoying, but yeah, none of those labels actually apply to what it is that I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to engage in the dialectic in an honest and sincere way, based on all the credible, valuable things that both sides can offer, right? Not because I have any particular specific allegiance to any one point or dot on that spectrum, right? And that's what I actually liked about Peterson as well at the beginning, is that he didn't seem to have that sort of allegiance, but that's slowly, well, that's not slow, that's kind of dissipating. He seems more and more like a traditional well, not a traditional conservative, but he seems more and more like a conservative, like just, run-of-the-mill, stick to the conventionalist conservative line conservative, and it's disappointing, because I actually thought there was other potential in there. And good Lord, Lord knows, if he had a real conversation with some of the more reasonable, interesting leftists out there, perhaps he'd shift some of his perspectives. Perhaps you'd have a more interesting, perhaps there'd be a more interesting, thought process there. But as it is, it's just, it keeps becoming this thing where it's like, well, I have to just resist the left at every turn, which is just how I think conservatives operate these days. It's like everything is about resisting the left, because we know the left is evil and we have to avoid the left at all costs. Which is annoying, just because, like, if you talk to, like, the reasonable leftists, none of the reasonable leftists actually believe in things like equality of outcome. None of the reasonable leftists believe in, complete parity, gender parity along every variable across every, in every industry, in every possible walk of life, complete gender parity in all things. In fact, the whole argument, like, you can easily make an argument for egalitarian policies without the intention of achieving total gender parity, right? And Peterson even brings this up. He talks about Sweden all the time and how they have, egalitarian policies, but the outcome variance between genders is greater. Exactly. But it's good. It's a good outcome variance because it's based on egalitarian policies, right? What the left is pursuing isn't actual parity. What they're pursuing is fairness, right? And what they were reacting to when they see a lack of egalitarianism is unfairness. What they're trying to quell is unfairness, right? So you can still pursue egalitarian policy. You can pursue any egalitarian policy almost, so long as your goal at the back of your mind isn't to achieve perfect gender parity across the board, because that part is never going to happen. And Peterson points this out, and he's correct. That part is never going to happen. You're never going to happen, because equality is de-equalizing. Once you try to establish equality, you will have a new variable where things aren't equal. where you're going to get an outcome variance. Exactly. That's the whole point. And from a complexitist frame, again, that's the thing that keeps happening across time, is that you go forward and time moves forward, and we establish equality on one level, and then inequality, outcome variance begins happening at another level. And one level after another, you constantly get new kinds of outcome variance in new ways. The differences between the genders manifest in new ways, and what the left is defending is that it manifests in new ways rather than old ways. And why? Why in new ways rather than old ways? Because the new ways are better. Because that's what progress is manifestation of difference in new ways rather than old ones, because the old ones have led to tyranny, or are tyrannical, or are usually tyrannical, or are at the very least are sometimes tyrannical. But in any of those cases, you do need outcome variance to emerge in new ways to what's the fucking word? You need it to emerge in new ways to have this kind of trade-off to mitigate the tyrannical downside of the old ways in which the difference is manifested. That's what's supposed to be happening, right? And any leftist with a brain can defend the idea from that perspective, but it never happens. And in any conversation I've seen with Peterson, no one defends it from that perspective. And perhaps Peterson is right to an extent, is that the leftists don't operate from that perspective. A lot of them. I would say that that's true. But that's not because leftism is bad. That's because the people that are leftists that you're talking to aren't very smart, and they're not very thoughtful, and they haven't thought this through, and they maybe have read some literature, and they have some practical sense of like the tyrannical hegemony of gendered ideas in the past and so on, and they might be very much right about, you know, the old tyranny of the ancien regime, but they can't express why the new way is better, even though the new way still offers an outcome variance. Well, that's because they're not thinking of, in the complexitist Beyondist BLR term, which is what I'm thinking in, and I'm telling you, you do want an outcome variance, you just want it in a new way rather than an old way. And that's the brilliant insight from the Beyondist perspective, that all the leftists ought to, you know, take the wisdom of that and actually implement it. I honestly wish, like, I have some vision in mind for what the dialectic between the right and the left is supposed to look like, but it's not happening anywhere in the real world. I've never seen an actual conversation or debate or talk between a rightist and a leftist that has captured what I think is the, you know, sort of a stable, healthy way in which that dialectic should be playing out. And part of the problem is neither side realizes what the purpose of the dialectic is. If they realized that the purpose of the dialectic, it would be healthy, but it isn't, because they haven't realized it. So, which of course, I guess is indicative of the time period we're in, and the level of wokeness that society is at. And the idea, by which I don't mean like, you know, the conventional notion of wokeness. I mean actual, real wokeness. We're not actually awake yet. We're not even really getting there, I'd say. We're sort of, there is a small community of people that I've found that are perhaps a tiny bit leaning in the direction of true wokeness, and I thought Peterson was one of them, but yeah, there ain't many of us. So you have that. Of course, realize that everything that I just said is probably going to seem like gibberish to the conventionalists out there, but hey, it is what it is. There's one more thing I wanted to mention. Yeah, I mean, the gender thing. The other thing about Peterson, see, here's the thing. Like, I don't live by Peterson's actual rules and, you know, his 12 rules. I've never even read that book. I haven't, you know, cleaned my room. Yeah, I haven't done the specific things he's recommended. But I understand the value of them, and I can understand the value of those things for most of the people. You know, there is something that a lot of people can take from it. Oh, here's another thing that I like about Peterson. What I like about Peterson is what he's done with religion. I think the atheist perspective. So here's the thing. I'm not religious whatsoever. I'm a secularist, I guess. There is nothing that I specifically get from religion that I need. So I'm not religious. However, and this is a complex argument to get into, but unfortunately, and I used to think that this was the case, but you cannot obsess if in a progressive sense over a outcome where there is no religion anymore in the world. You cannot have that, right? I mean, you can try to establish that, and you might even succeed in establishing that, but that would be antithetical to the purpose. And in practical sense, I feel like that probably wouldn't even happen anyway. Opposing religion is not something that anyone should honestly be doing. Opposing some of the specific downsides of religion is something people should be doing, and that's something that people already do, which is good, and keep doing that. That part is great. The problem that I see within atheists is going to the point where, like, oh, we should oppose religion completely, and because it's totally wrong, and there's just nothing, there's nothing in it of value whatsoever. That part is false, right? And you have certain philosophers, Peterson and specifically in like Kierkegaard as well, who would, you know, argue and defend the idea that there actually is some value in those ideas, at least ethically, at least as far as like perspective, that you can't do away with, right? And if you tried to do away with it, you'd have a problem, right? You'd create a problem. And this actually applies to all religions, not just Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. This applies to all religions across the board. There is something uniquely special and valuable in each and every one. And again, this makes sense from the complexitist frame. Each and every single one matters and has something to contribute, and you need to retain that something. Not clear what that something is, but there is definitely something there, which is why you can't just do away with them. That's basically it. That's the only thing. There's a complex argument for why that's true and why these belief systems, despite having all these problems, still retain some fundamental level of deservingness, that they still deserve to inhabit the system. Well, I don't want to get into that fully, but the point is I think that that is true. I suspect that that's true, which is why I'm honestly, you know, I used to profusely oppose religion, especially when I was younger. I used to think it was really smart to do that, you know, really smart and brilliant. But at this point, it's just sort of like the atheist-theist debate is boring. It's resolved. It doesn't matter. And opposing the belief system in its entirety and trying to wipe it from the system is just antithetical to progress at this point. It's not as valuable as it seems. And in actuality, it's actually problematic. You don't even want to do it. So there's that. That's a good thing about Peterson. Yeah, I mean, you have a sense of what it's about. You know, I find it like, I guess the real thing the reason I'm drawn to Peterson whatsoever is that, like, you have people. You have all kinds of belief systems in the world right now. You have conservatives and you have liberals politically. And you have, you know, you have some variations, you have some other nuances and variables in play. You have people who are fiscally conservative and socially liberal, which is the opposite of what I like, the exact opposite of what I am, which is more like socially conservative and fiscally liberal, right? And that camp that I just mentioned, that camp doesn't really exist. There is no, like, social conservatives that are fiscally liberal. Basically, all people that are socially conservative are also fiscally conservative. And then there's a few people that are fiscally conservative and socially liberal. But there's, like, no one who's socially conservative and fiscally liberal. And Peterson, at the very least, is he is socially conservative. I don't know what he is fiscally, but I find it accessible because on the social end, I can see myself being more conservative, and fiscally, I can see myself being very liberal. And Peterson is sort of one of the more accessible thinkers if that's your affinity. Now, the only weird thing is that that's not really an affinity. I haven't ever really heard of someone who's like that. And then I'm still being loose with that because I'm not really, you know, that socially conservative either. It's more, again, it's all these ideas of, like, honor and goodness and virtue, and these are very old concepts. You know, chivalry and valid. These are old concepts that have been around for a very long time, and Peterson emphasizes them, and that's where the socially conservative point comes in. Other practical elements of social conservatism I don't like, you know, the idea it's like, you know, heteronormative ideas of marriage and heteronormative ideas of life planning, and you have to get married at a certain age, and you have to have kids at a certain age, and you have to do all this shit when the, you know, when it's socially accepted, etc., etc. Yeah, that is all boring, dull, reductionist, annoying. I don't like it. But all of those fancy ideas, you know, of sort of perhaps even slightly romanticized ideas of that are old ideas, those ideas I actually like, right? And again, I'm more sympathetic towards the idea of religion now than I have been before. So that's where the socially conservative element comes in. But yeah, you get the idea. Well, hopefully, some of you have you've gotten something out of this video. I've sort of been in a state where I haven't really known what to say or what to talk about or what to do or what to even think. I've had video ideas popping up in my mind. I wanted to talk about Peterson because he just keeps coming up, and I still see the same mistakes being made, you know, the same problems with the way people see him and think of him and understand him. And not that I don't have problems with him. I just, I guess, I don't see, like, the disagreements that I have. I don't see Peterson as a threat, as the basic, like, difference, I guess, between me and most of the leftists that have problems with him. I don't see him in any sort of real way as a threat. Like, not to leftism, not to progress, not to anything, right? I feel like if there was enough reasonability on the left, people like Peterson would be okay. They'd be totally fine. They'd fall in line. These are not the people that are going to start royalist insurrections if we try to, you know, depose the king. These are not the people that are going to defend the ancien regime till the end of time. That is not who Peterson is, not by a long shot. So he's not a threat. He's not a threat, but he's not unproblematic. He's not perfect. He's not right about a lot of things. You know, and fundamentally, it's this whole just a presumptuousness about, like, the system and how all you have to do is make your own life better. And that doesn't work, because what on earth even is better? You haven't answered that question, Jordan, right? The left certainly hasn't answered that question. I mean, well, they have an answer. It's wrong, but at least they have an answer. But you haven't answered that question, right? So what I want to see, both from Jordan and the leftists and everyone, is that please, honestly, apply your brain more and try to answer the question, what is better? Okay, and what is better for the system, not what is better for you or for individuals, because that's the thing that people have a basic understanding of, but they don't have a good understanding of what's better for the system. And that's an area of investigation that, well, that's in need of exploration. Anyway, that's essentially all I wanted to say on this. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this. Cheers. Farewell.